People in the future who want to do work on the river, they just need to understand it's not something you're going to decide to do in May and it'll be done by October. It's again almost a 2-year process. When we bought the property, it was a repo from a bank, and so it was essentially sold as is. And the prior owners had put in, down here to my right, had put in an unpermitted dock, and as they'd taken it out, they left a lot of concrete behind. Additionally, they did quite a bit of removal of the lemon willows, which resulted in bank erosion. So since 2018, when we purchased it, we lost about 3 to 4 feet of bank due to undercutting here along the main, and then towards the end where we have a scour, we lost 6-7 feet. And we just decided that couldn't go on. And so we just said, what can we do to put the bank back how it was and mitigate erosion in the future? So we worked with the DEQ, Oregon Department of State Lands, Oregon Department of Agriculture, the Army Corps of Engineers. There was a cultural review towards the end, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and of course Deschutes County. So all those agencies kind of had to work together around both COVID occurring at the same time and some of the really tragic wildfires we had in Oregon here, which took a lot of resources as we were getting into the permitting phase. I found out that my neighbor here, Kyle, has a contracting business, and I asked him to also bid on this work. So as we went through, talked about the work with Kyle and some others, he actually came up with the best bid.
John had this project engineered, and when I bid the job and looking at the engineered set of plans, they were very significant. There was a lot to them. You know, a standard set of plans for most jobs that Kotlarz Construction does is 5 to 10 pages, and this was hundreds and hundreds of pages with all the different agencies involved. So it was a big challenge for Kotlarz Construction, but we knew we were up for the task, and it was also an exciting project because you're dealing with heavy equipment, in water work, trees, boulders, vegetation, sloping. So yeah, we were excited to tackle on the project. To gain access for this project, we had to build an access road, and that was to get our heavy equipment and machinery in here. And before those were allowed on the job, those had to be inspected and washed. We had to have a separate area for fueling our equipment with fuel, and any greasing or anything that needed maintenance had to be done separate area away from any in-water or floodplain work. And to get to the project itself, we had to remove a lot of existing vegetation so we could get all of our stuff near the project. Before we had started the project, the riverbank was extremely steep. It was roughly a 1-to-1 slope, if that. So essentially it's just a 7-foot wall, just almost vertical, of hardly any vegetation, no trees, and improper fill, logs. There was some concrete that was unpermitted that we needed to remove for the project. I had to have my excavator right up on the river, which takes a lot of experience, and just to do the project safely, we're getting our heavy equipment very close to the river. And so there's 250 feet roughly on this project of river frontage that we were going to be working on, and the last 50 to 75 feet is what we call the Scour area, and that area is on a hard corner on the river, and the current was just sitting and just hitting it directly straight on and eroding it over time. So during standard summer flows, this river's 1 to 4 feet, 4 feet being deep, and this scour area was anywhere from 7 to 8 feet, and just constantly eroding and sending sediments downstream, not providing any structure, nothing that's going to help out anything downstream. So once again, before the project had started, we had almost a vertical bank, and for success of the project, we needed to slope the project anywhere from a 2-to-1 slope to a 3-to-1 slope. So we took our laser and waders out in the river, and we took several measurements of high water, and roughly we were 7 feet below the current and existing bank. So we needed to come back anywhere from 14 to 21 feet. We started measuring everything out and standing on our slope, our rough slope, and we decided a 2-to-1 might not have been enough, so we sloped closer to a 3-to-1 throughout the whole project. I began by sloping the bank per the set of plans with my mini excavator, and taking my time and getting the slope called for on the plans, and all the excess dirt we set on top of the project, and all that excess dirt I used my skid steer and we moved it to a separate staging area, preparing for filling in the scour area. So the plans called for 17 to 20 large trees, most of them being 12 inches in diameter and bigger, and a lot with root balls. So all of our trees needed to come off private property. Here in Central Oregon, we have beautiful ponderosa pines that we were lucky to harvest off of some private property, and we had them hauled into our access area and staged. Once they were staged in our staging area, to cut down on weight and sizing, getting them into our tight access area, we had to cut them down to exact measurements of what we were going to need. So when we were hauling the trees over from the staging area onto the project, you know, we're roughly hauling 5,000 to 6,000 pounds of trees. So we had to make sure that it was, we went up, took our time, went slow, used rigging that was appropriate and weight rated for what we were lifting. And when we brought our big trees in, we wanted to be careful not to damage the trees and scar them up or damage parts of the project that we didn't need to. So once we had all of our trees to roughly where they were going to go out in the project, we had a sill log or a log vein that was roughly 10 to 12 feet, and we notched it out for our 45-foot trees, our log veins, to go on that notch. That way our trees weren't rolling. In order to fasten the trees together, we had to do them one at a time, and we had to drill through all the trees involved in the process and put large 5/8 and 3/4 steel bolts, like big all-thread bolts. And once those were in, we had to take the top log of the log vein with our rigging and slowly set it on our steel bolts. And it was crucial that we were close with our drilling and close with our bolts and our holes. That way everything lined up and we didn't damage our bolts and our trees fit on nicely. Anytime you're doing in-water work, DEQ requires some means of protection so you're not passing any sediments or debris down the river. So we chose to use a turbidity curtain on this project, which needed to be within 100 feet of our work at all times. So there was multiple times during the project that I got on my waders and we placed the turbidity curtain level and downstream mostly with our work.
I was in charge of, okay, let's make sure that we're not going to contaminate the water. We're going to meet all the DEQ rules. I'll do all the sampling. Upper Deschutes River Council actually had an instrument I didn't have to buy. They had a turbidity meter I could borrow, so they loaned it out to me, and I know how to work them. I've worked them forever. Well, we did calibration checks every time we sampled because my little granddaughter just likes running the instrument. So she'd be over there helping me run instruments. I took a lot of samples when I worked in industry. So we would go take samples, we would flush them 3-4 times, the sample bottle, we'd flush the bottle 3-4 times, and then we would actually catch our samples and measure them. And we kept a journal of what was going on work-wise so that we can kind of track down if turbidity is going up, why, and we could mitigate it.
So once our log veins were built and placed approximately close to where they were going to go into the bank, I had to get the excavator as close as I could to the bank and dig a 15 to 20 foot hole back. These 3 major log veins were going to be pointed roughly 25 degrees upstream angle and slope ever so gently, so when the water rises, it's connecting with that tree and structure the whole time. So I got as close as I could to the riverbank, and we dug our 20-foot holes, and approximately they're 5,000 pounds, so we had to bring in a crane truck to safely rig and safely lift these big log veins, place them where they needed to be. And there was some communication, and it takes a minute to get it perfect, you know. And once it was perfect how we liked it, we backfilled everything with the excavator. Once our 3 major log veins were built and set in the bank how we wanted, then we were moving on to the scour area, which was definitely the most difficult part of this project. As we talked about before, it was just an endless hole of eroding bank that was 7 to 8 feet deep. So when we tackled that, we had to bring in structure for that scour area. If you were just to put dirt in the endless hole, it would just immediately wash downstream. Once we placed our 5 root ball systems in the scour area, we could start bringing in all the backfill that we staged from the sloping of the original bank. So we placed our 5 root ball systems, and we started backfilling with that dirt and compacting it with my skid steer. And my skid steer is roughly 9,000 to 10,000 pounds, and I'm having to get inches from these root ball systems and then the water, obviously. So took our time, did it safely, got everything compacted the way it should have been. We ended up having to bring in a bunch of fill with dump trucks and filling all that in to that 2 to 3 to 1 slope that we talked about before. Once our rough grading was done throughout the whole project, including the main part and the scour area, we brought in a jute geotextile and laid that down. So what that jute geotextile is doing is providing stability for the bank for erosion purposes, and that's gonna kind of hold everything in place. Once we put that down, we ended up putting an inch or 2 of compost and topsoil to help all of our new grasses and vegetation and plants establish. So we're excited that this is going to work. If the water does raise, we're going to have our jute and all these new root systems and vegetation to help hold this bank stable.
So now that everything's done, man, this looks great. We believe it will work. All of the seeds are in the ground. We're hoping they're going to spring here in the next 2 weeks so that they can kind of get more root bound during the winter time. We do have obligations with Deschutes County, so once a year we take photos and we show, you know, all the work that we've done meets the intent of the project. Talking to Kyle, watching Kyle kind of work over on his own property, I I just knew he was the right guy because he had so much passion. He went through all the permitting to make sure everything was right, and he even had a lot of passion to go down to Deschutes County and have several arguments with them. And as I would go to Deschutes County and talk with them, I'm like, I got the right guy. He wants to get it done right.
Being a new business owner, this was a major project for Kotlarz Construction. So dealing with the county and the state, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps of Engineers, that's a lot going on at one time. And this project window had to be done between the months of July and October. So it was a lot of anticipation to get the project done in the window. And John has been looking forward to this project for over 3 years.
As I look back as to why were there delays, and from both sides. You can do the government permitting side, you can do my engineer, you can do my landscaping, myself. 3.5 years. But then I said, okay, if you're stuck with a July through October window and you want to do river work, this is fairly extensive, but okay, you want to do some river work like we did, then the best you can do going backwards is about 19 months to 2 years. You have to start ahead because you need to know what you're getting into. How big's your scope? Don't just write out what I think my scope's going to be for my permit and then send it to the permitting agencies. You have to meet them face to face. And don't just ask for the person that's assigned to you. You want a meeting with all of them because they all have different opinions. And I've learned that if it doesn't make sense, if you kind of argue with them a bit in a bigger group, you sometimes win and you sometimes lose. But why it's important to plan all that is you've got your civil guys, they're going to sit here and plan their work. And then you have to deal with plants. There's 487 plants sitting here on our bank. And as you're trying to execute, all those have to happen at the same time. And if you miss your window, then what are you going to do with 500 plants? They're not going to sit there for a year. What are you going to do if you have to cancel your contractor and wait another year?
There's a lot of people moving in to this beautiful area, and they're going to want to be doing similar projects to help erosion, to help mitigation of stream issues. So I think everyone can benefit from the success of this project and see what it brings us in the future.